Lewis in the Black Horse Pub. Good morning again, and here I am back again. As you can hear, my voice begins to creak at this stage, and it's a gorgeous day outside, and unfortunately, an old bugaboo of the sun getting in our eyes, most unexpected at this time of the year. But let's fly across the water, across the channel to Normandy, and as if by magic, good morning, Harry.
Hello.
Harry Atterton.
Yes.
And Harry, we're going to be joined by Richard Barton in 15 minutes or so. He just popped down to the butcher's, as one does. And he is one of our barristers and a very articulate and travelled man. And when I asked if he would like to sit in and talk to you, he leapt at the chance. So we shall get to that in a few minutes' time. So how are things in Normandy this morning?
Well, I was just looking on with envy when I looked at the titles of this program, and I saw the picture of the pub. What a wonderful sight that is, and the scenes of plates with Yorkshire pudding and gravy swimming around, and the Christmas spirit. I mean, gosh, I've been on the run for 60 years now, more than that, I think, since I left Britain. And I miss that tradition so much, and I just wish I was there and with you in the studio, because it brings back so many happy memories.
Yes, I wish you were too, because Melissa Conti has been over here for a few days, but in another part of the country. But she's coming down to Lewis today to say hello. So actually, it would have been the gathering of the clans. Half of Mirador Television would have been in Lewis, which would have been rather nice. But I have to say, I was here for lunch yesterday, and the lunch, as you describe, is as described. Declan, our chief of staff, but also the pub owner, pub host, is make sure he goes over everything meticulously. And it is a joy coming to this pub, I have to say. Where have you spent Christmases, Harry?
My sensitivities, or you mean for in terms of food, or I missed that question.
Which places have you spent Christmases?
I spent Christmases in many different parts of the world. One of the oddest Christmases I spent was in Barcelona, which was a very, very British Christmas. All the traditional Christmas carols and decorated trees and presents and hanging on doorknobs. It was typical. But no, I'm trying to think where's the oddest place I spent Christmas. Japan, perhaps? No. It depends. People approach Christmas in a different way. It comes, I think, from the heart. And one of the great British traditions is to celebrate Christmas. There's a criticism, of course, that it's kept alive by commercialism, which is true. But it's commercialism that underpins these moments and reminds us of our Christian Judaic heritage. I think that's important, and when I see people celebrating, it surely is an uplift to their spirit, to their hearts, and so it's the approach to Christmas has got to be individual. Other societies, other cultures celebrate other moments in the year, which of course have to be respected. But the British Christmas is something that's hard to beat.
Yes, I agree with you. I agree with you. The funny thing is that we adopted the turkey, which of course is the American Thanksgiving
Mhm.
feast.
Well, it's an unfortunate bird, really, because it's not the tastiest of all birds, and it's rather dry, I find. But with so much food, and the basis of French cuisine, I suppose, it's not what the basic material is; it's what you do with it and what you put on it. And French cuisine is largely based, I think, on sauces. Since Escoffier, the great French chef at the Ritz at the turn of the previous century, he developed a new style of French cooking, but a continuation in some ways, mind you, of going back to Vatan, who was Louis XIV chef. It's how you treat food, how you do it up, and how you put it together. British food, or at least traditional British food, going back to Christmas dinners, that sort of thing, has got that solid nature about it that once you've had a good Christmas dinner, you can face the world. And certainly you can face the next week. You don't need to eat again for several days. Um, I think that takes us into an area where how do people approach food? Is it simply a means of refueling, or is it an artistic exercise in its preparation and a pleasurable experience in the eating of it? In North America, where you and I have spent a lot of our time, it's a little bit like a refueling stop. If you go to a good restaurant in the States, people will say, "Oh, it was excellent. We were in and out of there in 20 minutes."
Yes, yes, yes.
Service is the factor, and so it was, yes, just simply a refueling stop. The idea of going out for an evening meal and enjoying it at a slow rhythm, progressively, and having the full culinary experience, I think, is more a European tradition and or an Asian tradition too, an Asian tradition. And Britain is moving in that direction. The quality of cooking in England has gone sky high, in my opinion. I was recently in Ludlow, Shropshire, and which is known, of course, it's a gastronomic centre of Britain. And the quality of the restaurants there would give any French restaurant a run for its money. They were top of the line, absolutely first class, and interestingly enough, the prices didn't give you indigestion either.
Well, it is interesting that Lewis, of course, as I've mentioned before, has a tradition of good pub food. The pub food is good. In all 16 excellent pubs, you can't get a bad meal.
Mhm.
But we don't have any really first class, top of the range restaurants.
Mhm.
And I think it's I want to call him Marco Polo, but has bought our old studio, the White Hart Hotel, and is turning it into a first class restaurant with a boutique restaurant. So, if you want a great weekend's dining, you can go and stay in the hotel, and the restaurant will be just downstairs.
And when will that be opening? When will that be opening?
Well, the estimates that I've heard, and of course I'm only going on gossip, is that it will be about 3/4 of a year before it's opened.
Mhm.
So we should probably expect it sometime around autumn next year, perhaps October next year. At the moment, it's looking rather lonely and sad because it's got the security people in while they strip out the inside. Although for those people who are very fond of the White Hart, and particularly its historical nature, it is listed, and they can't actually interfere with some of the stuff that Tom Paine ate and drank in front of. So it's going to be interesting to see what they make of it.
Well, I think they've obviously found a niche. There's been a need, as you say, for that kind of a restaurant. So hopefully they'll hit it right on the spot. But there's a thought, coming into my head. Do I not recall many years ago, and maybe it still exists, there was a very famous restaurant, gourmet restaurant on the West Coast, on the South Coast, I should say. Now, was it at Lewis? And was it not called the White Hart or something like that? But perhaps not in Lewis. I'm going back 40 or 50 years now. Somewhere near Southampton, I think it was. Very famous.
It could be. It's not striking a chord with me.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the interesting things is that the history recalls the record show. Here's Richard. Now, since we're talking about food, I have to tell you, he is a chef par excellence. Is a really, really fine cook and knows his food left, right, and center. So I'll let you two natter about that in a minute. But the center of Lewis had 4 or 5 taverns where you could get a good meal, and for travelers. And we're talking about sort of 1500. And it was so well known that people would change their travel patterns to be able to dine at these restaurants and inns and so on. And who did they belong to? The Priory.
Oh my goodness! Yes. Well, that's like the priories and the monks controlling the beer trade in Europe, in Belgium and France and everywhere. That quite a tradition. The church has always been known to not go short of the good things in life. There we go. And anyway, so I see a similarly hirsute gentleman sitting next to you.
Yes, indeed.
I guess this is the day for beards. Mind you, he's put mine to shame. I think it looks like he's been cultivating his. And but anyway, there we go. I keep mine rather short, but
Harry was saying, Richard, that as an expat, and he's travelled all over the world. I mean, he's been to almost as many countries as I have. Is that he misses the tradition of Christmas here? How do you feel about
that? As the person in my family who does all the cooking, I don't think I would miss the tradition of Christmas. But there we go. But I've got 3 adult daughters who are coming home for Christmas. And if I said to them, I'm not doing a turkey this year, or pigs in blankets, or stuffing, or whatever, they would be utterly, utterly mortified, because it's part of the tradition, isn't it?
It is, yes. And it's what Harry was saying, he misses.
Yeah, I can understand that.
Yeah.
Well, I do miss it. Now, I take it then that most pubs do put on a Christmas lunch or dinner and maintain that. But what about at home? Is it still the tradition in the English home to cook a full course Christmas meal, or do people go out no more?
I actually, Keith is wrong about me being a decent cook. The only reason he's saying that, let me tell you, is that he's never eaten any of my food, and he's just sort of hankering after an invitation. But I think most families, certainly on Christmas Day, will eat at home. But, business Christmas parties and that sort of thing will use the pubs and the taverns. And of course, inevitably, it's Christmas, and so they rack their prices up. Because they can.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, you raise a good point there, and that is, of course, that a good meal, good conversation, conviviality, it's all part of the mix, isn't it? It's no doubt lubricated by some good wine and whatever alcoholic beverages they feel that are appropriate to accompany the experience. The So it is a happy moment, a family moment, I guess. One wonders, people without families, without close relationships, whether it can be a lonely time. We hear these stories at Christmas about people being left out of society, and which is
Yes.
the same. But it should be an opportunity to bring people together, and I suppose that takes us back to the pub context, which is a meeting place.
Yes.
And
I
regrettably,
should say, Harry, is without getting too deeply into social affairs, but I think there is a difference between being alone and being lonely.
mhm,
I like to make that differentiation because being alone doesn't bother me. It just occasionally you'll have a little cloud pass over when you're lonely.
mhm,
But the very nature of we three is that
mhm.
we are never lonely.
Well,
We're
that's true.
always up to something, doing something, getting involved with something, and having a jolly good time, whether it's on our own or whether it's as part of a project or whether it's just a group of good friends out together.
Well, this is true, and we've got to be careful because some people are naturally gregarious, and need the company of others to fulfill their own emotions, whereas other people are perfectly happy with their own company. It's not unhealthy to be happy alone. It doesn't mean you're a loner. It means you're a complete person within yourself. Though the nature of humanity is we are tribal, we join, we like to be members of groups, whether it's a group, a rugby club, or whatever you name it. We join things, and we like to face life collectively. So there is a strength in numbers with people, and if the family structure is a critical element to the societal mix, I would see that people who are excluded from it um, can find a loneliness, even if they complete in themselves. They feel that there should be a further dimension to their lives. And again, taking us back to the pub, I think this wonderful institution, which is the English pub, where people do come together, and it's the most democratic institution that I've encountered in my 40, 40, no, 80 years of, no, 60, 70 years of international travel. I've never seen anything quite like it. There are drinking places all over the world, but the English pub is the most democratic institution where you meet people from all walks of life.
Yes, yes.
And it always bothers me when they talk about Britain being a class society. All societies are divided into classes in some way or other, either financial, economic, intellectual, what have you. But the English pub does provide a meeting place for all levels of people, and they do talk, they do communicate, and I think that's it's proof of a fairly flat society in class terms in Britain. And I rejoice in the existence of the English pub, and I'm saddened by the fact that so many of them, from what I understand, are going out of business. We're losing them at the rate of several hundred a year.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah, it is. It's very, very sad. I think there should be a law. Well, here we've got somebody who is familiar with the law. Could we pass a law that said that you couldn't close down a pub without permission?
Probably not, because they are businesses. But one thing that does happen occasionally over here is if you've got a pub and it's in a village and it's the only meeting place in the village or the small town, the locals will get together, buy it, and run it as a community pub,
Mm-hmm.
so that they retain it, because they're very aware that, I'm just thinking of there are villages around here where they've lost their one pub, and there's a place just north of Lewes that had what I have to fully accept was a proper spit and sawdust joint. But as you say, you go in there, you can meet anybody. And the inevitable happened. It was sold off, and now there are people's houses there. My local pub was called the Meridian because it's on the Meridian line between the Eastern and Western Hemisphere. So Keith and I live in the Western Hemisphere, not together, I should say. But most of Lewes is in fact in the Eastern Hemisphere. And the Meridian was a great little pub. It used to be the Pewter Pot before it was the Meridian. Before that, it was the Hole in the Wall. And that's years ago now, because it was called the Hole in the Wall because it was built as the canteen where food was served up to the men who were building Lewes Prison, which is just across the way. But inevitably, the same thing happened. Sold off, and now it's a bunch of really quite unattractive houses.
Yes, they really are awful, aren't they?
So the building itself is gone, then I take it.
Utterly, they just knocked it down completely.
Oh, what a shame! Yes, what a shame.
Yeah, and it's very odd what they've built there instead. There are some houses, if you can imagine, there are some places at the back, and then there are some that face onto the main road, Western Road here. And they designed them with full-length windows, literally full-length windows, on the first floor, which sounds quite nice until you open the curtains in the morning and the number 28 bus comes past just at eye level. But just in the 20 odd years that I've lived in Lewes, I think I can think of certainly 4 pubs that we've lost and have been redeveloped, and I imagine there will be more. There we go.
Well, there is, as I say, from statistically, from what I read, an enormous decline in the existence of the British pub. I suppose largely due to drinking driving laws, which explains the tradition or the transition to pubs being more inclined to serve food and full meals rather than pub snacks as it used to be in the olden days. So the business model of the pub has changed. But I strongly suspect that one of the problems is a taxation problem. It's a very easy thing to tax cigarettes and beer and whiskey and knowing, because people are hooked on them, so they'll continue to buy them, and it's a constant source of income. And the poor publican has got to face up to that, and to make ends meet, to make a viable pub business these days is, I'd imagine, quite a challenge. But that applies to lots of small businesses, and the role that small businesses played in society was that people did their shopping on a daily basis, and they went out and they met each other in the butcher's shop, the bakers and the candlestick makers, and there was this level of social intercourse which has gone from life now. There's the anonymity of the big supermarket chains where you may meet and chat with somebody, but essentially it's a functional thing where you go in and get out as quickly as you can and try and get a few decent bargains on the way. So it has impacted the way small businesses have been run, and that group pubs into that category. They've been seen as cash cows, I think, to the government and collectively. We talk about Britain being a nation of shopkeepers. At least Napoleon unkindly called us a nation of shopkeepers. It's very true. 60 to 70% of the British economy, certainly when I was a child, was from small business. It's not big businesses that keep the nation going. It's the small businesses end to end. So if you attack that and make it very difficult for people to make a living, then you're actually undermining your own economic foundations. Yeah.
Incidentally, Harry, just before we leave the tax situation, Sussex was actually governed by a smuggling gang called the Hawkhurst gang.
Mm-hmm.
Hawkhurst is just over the border in Kent, I think, but they ruled Sussex with an iron hand. And at the same time as Tom Paine was a customs officer.
Oh, yeah.
And several commentators have said he must have been a very, very brave man or a very resourceful one, because they were not averse to killing the customs officers. And the Hawkhurst gang at a little town called Roberts Bridge, which is further along the coast in Sussex, actually took on the British Army and beat them.
My goodness. Well, I've heard of Roberts Bridge. I wonder if it's in that context, perhaps, in historical context.
It's a lovely little place, actually. Yeah. Lovely little town. But they were eventually they went too far, and they killed a couple of people in horrible circumstances. For instance, they tied one to the back of a horse and marched him to Chichester, so that he had to just have his heels touching the ground, so that in most difficult circumstances he walked all the way. And when they untied him, of course, he collapsed to the ground and died. And people found that abhorrent, and it signaled the end of the Hawkhurst gang. But just one caution, because there was a fisherman in a tiny little place called Bishopstown, who got into conversation with one of the Hawkhurst gang and begged a lift back from Eastbourne to his home cottage. And he was picked up on the way as a smuggler. And he was saying, no, I just asked for a lift. I'm just riding on their horse. And he was sent to the Old Bailey and was hanged.
That's not very good.
No, it's not.
But, man's inhumanity to man is
absolutely. Don't stick your thumb out.
Legendary. Hanging. I think did we not mention once before, and I'm not positioned to talk about this. We have a legal expert in our midst now, but I believe that it wasn't removed from the statute book until about 1953 that you could be hanged for stealing a sheep or more than 1 shilling. It had remained. It wasn't applied anymore, of course, but it was still on the statute.
There were a lot of bizarre statutes that in the 50s there was a sort of mopping up exercise to get rid of what were deemed to be ludicrous laws, and I think that was part of it. Yes.
Did you know, Harry, that in France it is still on the statute books? It is illegal to call a pig Napoleon.
Oh, it is indeed. In fact, there's a list at every town hall in France as to what you can call your children. And if you want to christen one of your children with a name that's not on that list, you've got to get the approval of the local mayor. Now, there are some that are completely verboten, which is, as you say, Napoleon. If the family name is Bonaparte, you can't call your child Napoleon. But now here's a cruncher. Do you know that list exists in Britain? There is a list in Britain as to what you can call your children. Now, it's not been applied for a long, long time. How long, I've no idea, but centuries probably. But there is an official list of what you're allowed to call your children. And I am an example of that. I am only the second, or is it third generation of English people to be called Harry. Harry previously was a diminutive or derivative of Henry. Henry. And Harry only became a name in its own right, or became used as a name in its own right, in about the 1850s, where people could actually be christened Harry. My grandfather, who was born in 1877, was Harry. I'm named after him. So that's a grandfather. A couple of generations later, I was the first Harry in the family that followed him. So Harry was not an officially accepted name until about 1850. So I'm an example of it. That list still exists, but it's not been applied, and it's probably, as you say, been in the big clean out of the old laws that were just cluttering up the spike on the desk. I suppose it's all gone now. But and the old Napoleonic laws, the revision of the Napoleonic laws, the last major revision took place in 1970, which isn't a long time ago. Famous crimes of passion, where if you killed your lover because they were unfaithful, you actually could put together a defense based on that. It's no longer possible, but it's as recent as that, 1970, which is what, 30, 50 years ago, that's all. Crimes of passion, no longer allowed in France, but they were on the books and applied as recently as 1970. Yeah.
I'm going to leave you to chat to Harry for 2 minutes while I let Liza in, who has arrived for her program next.
Yes, you know, I suppose in England we do have the law of diminished responsibility, which is only a partial defence, but it can be used in similar circumstances to convert a murder charge to a manslaughter charge. But it doesn't provide a complete defence. And, you know, if you attack somebody and they die, there's a limited number of defences you can have. And I suppose the most obvious one is self-defence, which can be a complete defence. If you can show that you were the one being attacked.
But is there not, I know under Canadian jurisprudence, which I think was largely based on the old British North America Act, before the Canadian Constitution was repatriated, there is a law that if you find yourself in an impossible position to which there is no natural outlet, you can be excused certain acts which in other contexts would be illegal. So there is a loophole in the law. You are the expert in that, not I, for sure. But I'm sure that all laws are not watertight. My goodness, we're living right through a moment at the moment where they're trying to introduce a law on deportations to Rwanda. And the argument is that they can already find several loopholes in it before it's even been debated in Parliament. So the lawmakers must have a tremendous difficulty in establishing watertight laws. I wonder how it's possible without them becoming draconian.
Well, you know, it's an odd little feature of the English law is that the reason that the partial defence of diminished responsibility to a charge of murder was brought in was that was back in the early 50s, was because juries, knowing that if the defendant's found guilty of murder, they will hang, were often reluctant to convict. And so people who had undoubtedly committed some form of criminal conduct were walking away.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why it was brought in. And it's been sort of revised over time. It sort of makes sense now.
So what you're really saying is that the nature of the punishment influenced the jury decision because they didn't want to come up with a guilty verdict. because the punishment was so extreme that it may have overreached the need to bring justice into the equation. Is that the jury were influenced by the nature of the punishment that would follow if they choose to go that route?
And it's something which has increased in the past few years, because it used to be the case that not everybody owned the book Archbold, which is the criminal lawyer's sort of Bible. But nowadays you can look up on the internet what sort of sentence somebody would get for you're the juror that you're trying. And jurors may, and often I believe do, check on that. And I'm aware of cases, I've been involved in them on both sides, where the jurors come back with what are effectively perverse verdicts of not guilty. And I strongly suspect, I don't know because I'm not allowed to ask them, but I strongly suspect that they looked at the sentencing guidelines and said 25 years. He deserved to be punished a bit, but not 25 years. And I think that happens increasingly, and it's odd. I don't want it to be like a sort of priesthood thing where all the lawyers will talk in Latin and the common people aren't allowed to know what the law says. I'm not saying that at all, quite the contrary. But there is that downside to it, that no matter how much a judge says to them, and it's a standard direction, you decide on the evidence whether it's guilty or not. And I, the judge, if it's a guilty, will decide the punishment.
Well, does the judge, may I interrupt here just a second, does the judge have any latitude in terms of sentencing? Is there like a spread between 15 and 20 years or 25 years? So the judge himself, even admitting a guilty verdict from the jury, can decide what the proper weighting would be in terms of the sentence? Or is the judge then completely obliged to give a fixed punishment to a fixed crime?
Well, the only fixed penalty is life imprisonment for murder. And then a judge has to settle on a minimum term that the person serves. There is something nowadays in this country called the Sentencing Guidelines Council, and they issue, as the name suggests, guidelines for different offences, but there are brackets. So it's not, it has to be this. This is the starting point, but it could be between there and there. And if a judge gets it wrong, obviously a defendant can appeal if a judge has gone over the top. So if a sentence is manifestly excessive. And equally, for more serious offences, the prosecution can appeal if it's an unduly lenient sentence. So judges are much more constrained now than they were certainly when I started. And in a way, an advantage of that is if I've got a client and they say, what am I going to get? I can probably guess within 10% one way or the other what they're likely to get and tell them.
Well, this is interesting because on our side of the water, this side of the channel, there is a very serious conflict between the courts, the prosecution side of the courts, and the judiciary making the decisions. And the most awful crimes are being committed. and ultra-light sentences are being applied by it's highly politicized, what they call a very left-wing judiciary, who do not, by nature, believe in incarceration. And they'll do anything to set a person, in fact, free on the streets who committed repeated crimes. We get situations here where people are coming before the justice for the 15th or 20th time for the same crime, some of them very serious crimes. And there's a huge political debate currently in France that the punishment is not fit for the crime, that it should be much more severe. And added to that, there are quite interesting rules about time off for so-called good behavior, but you just become automatically applied. So if you get sent to prison for 10 years, you normally will get out pretty automatically after 2 or 3. That's how dramatic the reduction of prison time is. And in fact, you've got to do something pretty proud now before you get sent to prison. It's due to a political philosophy which dominates the French judiciary, but it's also due to a lack of prison places.
Well, I was going to say that because in this country, a few months ago, the government issued further guidance to the judges saying, if it's a shorter sentence that you're thinking of imposing, you ought to deal with it in a non-custodial way. And the only reason for that is because lack of prison places. I'm confident about that.
Are there new prisons being built?
Only, 1 or 2. The number of prisoners at the moment is far in excess of what is said to be the number of places that could be used. So up the way at Lewis, and I know people won't necessarily have sympathy with criminals, but they're often locked up 23 hours a day in a cell about the size of a small bathroom. 2 of them in there. No rehabilitation, no training, no therapeutic work. And so they do their sentence and then they come wandering down Western Road here, having really just twiddled their thumbs for 6 months and not in any way been shown the error of their ways. There are those who wear it as a badge of honor that they've been to prison.
In France, Harry?
Sorry, I'm just going to say, is there a philosophy as well as in Britain, as there indeed is in France, that they resist sending young offenders to prison because they will then be trained, and it's like an apprenticeship, to become more hardened criminals, because they'll fall under the influence of people who will take them to the next stage of misbehavior. And that it is almost like an apprenticeship for crime to go to prison in France. Is that possible? Is that a similar philosophy in Britain?
Yes. Some years ago, there was a review of the prison system, which concluded that a prison is a place that makes a bad person worse.
Right.
For that reason, that people meet up and the youngsters learn off the older ones and get it inculcated in further crimes.
No, that is a problem there too. There's certainly, that's part of the prison philosophy as applied in France, for sure. That is the worst place to send a young offender. They they have a system of applying people, young people certainly, towards doing public works, or 200 hours of community service of some sort or another. I'm not quite sure what that comprises, but it's felt a much better therapy than putting them in the slammer, you know.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Harry, is my memory playing me false, or were there or are there elements of Napoleonic law in Quebec?
Well, the entire French judiciary system is based on Napoleonic law. But like all legal systems, it evolves, and bits and pieces of it change. But it's amazing just how much of administrative law, judicial law, and the general rules of conduct in France are based on the work of Napoleon and his people. And in fact, Napoleon himself, he had a direct hand in formulating a lot of these laws. An amazing, amazing man. We as Brits see Napoleon as the enemy, you know, Waterloo, Wellington, and all the rest of it. And certainly he was somewhat of a dictatorial character, but he was an amazing person, and he's left an imprint on France, which to this day is to be found in most jurisprudence and most community law. So quite a remarkable man. He developed the cadastral plan. He mapped France. So when you buy or sell a property in France, you're actually buying it off a plan that he launched. He launched it, wasn't completed until 1826. He died in 1821. But that's the same plan that we still use today if you buy or sell a property in France. The influence of Napoleon on the legal, judicial, community system in France is paramount.
Well, actually, Richard and his colleague, the other member of the two Bs, Philip, are rather experts on Napoleon, and we did a whole program on him the other morning.
Oh, that's wonderful. Because I'd like to know more about it. I mean, he's hated and revered and by the French themselves, but I think above all admired for what he accomplished, and he was obviously very ambitious and you know, seen by some as a dictator, as a megalomaniac, but the guy obviously was an exceptional brain and made a contribution to. He certainly managed to soften the deleterious effects of the French Revolution, which was a catastrophe, and it almost saved the French from themselves, because the excesses of the reign of terror during the revolution threatened to derail the nation completely and led to all sorts of aberrational activities, such as the persecution of the Vendée, where hundreds of thousands of people were just murdered. I mean, it's just a scandalous period of time. So he brought the revolution back under control, and when he took supreme power and had himself crowned emperor, I think 1804, I'm not sure which is my dates now. You know, he did bring France back on track and led to France becoming what it is today. So quite a remarkable man. I think he should be seen in that context in history and not simply as an enemy of Britain. That's a personal view. I mean, Richard was, if he's more deeply into that, he would have been far better qualified to talk about that than I am.
No, you know, I think like many brilliant people, and I'm thinking Keith here, he did a lot of good, but he also did some really bad things as well. The invasion of Russia, which just killed off hundreds of thousands of French troops. You know, frankly, the attempt to come back and invade Belgium was just a terrible error on his part. I strongly suspect that had he just got back into Paris and said, I'm going to sit here and consolidate. I don't think any of the Allied forces would have had the stomach to go and fight him again. So he sort of brought Waterloo, as it were, on himself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but the metric system, the Napoleonic Code, whole range of things that he did that were sort of visionary. But I'm not sure I'd want to sit down and have dinner with him.
Well, it would be interesting to have dinner with him and challenge his with intellectual exercise. And of course, mind you, Richard, Christmas dinner, of course, since that would be applicable at the moment.
So what do you have for Christmas dinner?
Oh, it's to a degree, it's not dissimilar to the English dinner. It's a family occasion. The streets of France at Christmas are deserted. You could shoot a cannon, since we're talking about Napoleon, down the street and you wouldn't hit anybody. Everybody's at home, family occasion. They tend more to celebrate New Year, but Christmas very much family occasion. And so family meals, yes, family get-togethers. The streets are deserted. Even the bars are closed. Everybody's closed down. It is just almost a barren wasteland in a French town or village at Christmas.
Do you think in France that Christmas retains a greater religious significance than it does in Britain?
Probably not. France is going through an enormous demographic change at the moment. I think we're pretty close to getting a 1 in 6, 1 in 5 mix of other religions. Certainly, the Muslim religion. The churches are closing at an enormous rate, and mosques are opening at an enormous rate. The traditional Christmas celebrations or religious celebrations are fading. The youth, the churches are empty, except when there are funerals, and the elderly come to say farewell to their own. But no, I think for what was a major Catholic nation, it is becoming a lay nation, and of course that was enhanced by the law of 1905, which separated church and state. They felt the church had too much influence. On life, the two major Catholic countries in the world, and still are, in fact, are Mexico and the Philippines in terms of the number of people who believe. And if you go back to Mexico and to the Juarez Revolution of 1870, at that point, the church owned 7/8 of the land in Mexico. So with agrarian reforms, Juarez got himself elected and gave the land back to the peasants. And the Catholic Church was actually banned. You weren't allowed to practice religious ceremonies. You weren't allowed to go to mass. The church priests were nailed to their church doors. A terrible period of the persecution of the church in Mexico, but yet it has emerged as still a very staunch Catholic nation. Well, that same transition in France didn't happen. They've become a lay state legally and in terms of practice. So there's a tremendous decline in religious belief in France, impacted enormously by the immigration of different cultures. In Britain, it's people talk about massive immigration into Britain, but I think it's still running at about 3 or 4% of the population. Here, we're looking at, as I say, way up. Well over official figures, 10 or 12%, though nobody has official figures. You're not allowed to count cultural origin when when declaring French demographics. It's against the law. We're not allowed to know by law. The mayor of a town or a commune is not allowed to know how many people of Arab descent are in his commune. He's not allowed to have the figures. He has to count them himself and keep them in his back pocket. So it's a very strange world, France, in that context. And by 2050, the traditional French population is going to be in the minority. So then you may get new religions coming in, which will ban the church. It's entirely feasible, and there's arguments being put forward to that effect now by people who want to retain French cultural French culture as it has been traditionally known. So we're going through enormous change in France at the moment.
Harry, I think I want to get you and Richard on together again, because some very interesting both historical and legal stuff has come out. And Richard is very much part of Mirador, so you don't mind coming in and having a chat to Harry again, do you, Richard? I think it would make a very fascinating program, which it has this morning. But we've got the lady champing at the bit, Liza Page, and she'll actually skin all of us if we actually don't make way.
Well, we won't want ladies champing at the bit. We want our ladies to be happy.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll make her happy, and we'll relinquish the floor. Thank you, Harry.
Thank you. And, are we on deck for next week, or is it?
Yes, we are. But as I'm trying to get everybody together next week, so if you'll stand by at about the same time, 10 o'clock,
good, yeah.
ready to come on. But there will be others milling around because it's our last day.
Okay, lovely.
All right, so look forward to seeing you.
My big regret is that I won't be in the Black Horse pub with you.
We'll try and make you feel as at home as possible.
We'll raise a glass for you.
Okay, well, you take care.
Okay.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye to Richard.
Harry.
Okay,
Thanks.
bye-bye. Bye-bye.
From Lewis in the Black Horse pub.